There's a reason INFJs can be brilliant thinkers, yet still struggle with consistency, and it isn't laziness or lack of discipline like people assume. It's something deeper, hidden beneath layers of emotional intelligence, intuition, and an inner world that never stops processing. INFJs don't fall short because they lack potential. They fall short because their mind is wired to move in intense waves, periods of hyper-focus followed by sudden emotional depletion that no one around them ever sees coming, and the world misreads this cycle completely. The truth is that INFJs carry an invisible pressure, the need for their actions to feel meaningful, aligned, and energetically authentic. When that inner alignment breaks even slightly, everything inside them slows down. They don't push through. They freeze, reflect, and reassess. Their intelligence is never the problem, their emotional calibration is. And until someone understands that, they'll continue to misunderstand why such a capable person can be so inconsistent in their output, yet so consistent in their depth. But once you understand what truly disrupts an INFJ's momentum, the emotional overload, the unmet internal expectations, the fear of disappointing others, and the constant mental simulations, everything finally makes sense. Their inconsistency isn't a flaw. It's a survival mechanism tied to a mind that feels, analyzes, absorbs, and carries far more than it was ever designed to hold alone. And the moment an INFJ learns how to work with their emotional rhythm instead of fighting it, everything about their life begins to shift. Before we go deeper, tell me this in the comments. Do you lose consistency because your energy changes or because your environment drains you? And type a line so I know you're here for the full truth. And if you're new, subscribe to Brainy One. Otherwise, you'll miss the next chapter in understanding how your mind actually works. INFJs lose consistency when their emotional energy fluctuates, not their intelligence. This truth sits at the core of their struggle, yet most people misread it completely. They assume inconsistency means lack of discipline, scattered focus, or poor planning. But the INFJ's inconsistency has nothing to do with cognitive ability. Their mind is sharp, structured, and capable of deep, sustained immersion. What changes from day to day, moment to moment, is the emotional current running beneath everything they touch. They don't operate on raw logic, they operate on alignment. When their emotional atmosphere is grounded, they move with precision, clarity, and unwavering focus. When that atmosphere shifts, even slightly, their inner world becomes noisy, and the energy they use to create, push, and sustain momentum is swallowed by internal processing. They're not distracted, they're overloaded. Most people work in straight lines. INFJs work in emotional loops. Their mind is tied to meaning, depth, and internal resonance, not mechanical repetition. When something feels right, they can pour hours into it without fatigue. When something feels off, their system shuts down as if a switch has flipped. And this shutdown is not a choice, it's a symptom of emotional saturation. They absorb too much of the environment, pick up subtle tensions, and unconsciously monitor the emotional patterns around them. That sensory intake drains the energy needed for consistency, even though the INFJ outwardly appears calm and capable. Their inconsistency is also a side effect of living with an inner landscape that never stops analyzing, interpreting, or translating life into meaning. They're constantly adjusting to the emotional tone of others, recalibrating their expectations, and navigating the weight of thoughts too layered to ignore. When that internal world becomes too dense, their external rhythm breaks. It's not laziness. It's not lack of willpower. It's the cost of having a mind that feels as deeply as it thinks. And yet, when the emotional noise clears, even briefly, INFJs return to their tasks with renewed force, often producing more in a few hours than others do in days. Their consistency comes in waves, not straight lines, and once they understand this pattern, they stop blaming themselves for it. The real challenge isn't intelligence or discipline, it's emotional bandwidth, and the moment they learn to protect it, everything changes. They struggle when tasks feel meaningless or disconnected from their deeper purpose. This is the quiet fracture point in every INFJ's consistency. The moment a task loses purpose, their energy collapses. They can force themselves forward for a while, using discipline and sheer willpower. But once the internal meaning evaporates, their motivation dissolves with it. INFJs are not built to function on autopilot. They cannot move through life mechanically, checking boxes or repeating routines that feel hollow. Their mind is wired to seek direction, intention, and emotional truth in everything they do. When that alignment disappears, the task becomes a weight rather than an aim, and the INFJ instinctively withdraws, not out of laziness, but out of psychological suffocation. This internal shift is often invisible to others. INFJs may appear calm, functional, even cooperative, but inside they are drifting. Their attention scatters, their focus thins, and the activity in front of them feels like a false note in a song they can no longer hear. Meaning is their oxygen. Without it, every action becomes an unanswered question. Why am I doing this? What is this leading toward? How does this align with who I am becoming? These aren't pretentious queries, they're structural. The INFJ brain connects tasks to identity, values, and long-term vision. When a task lacks emotional or philosophical coherence, their inner system rejects it. And this rejection doesn't happen with anger or rebellion. It happens quietly, subtly. Their pace slows, their energy dims, their mind wanders towards something more authentic, something that matters. They don't procrastinate because the task is hard. They procrastinate because it feels empty. They can work nonstop on something meaningful, even if it's demanding, complex, or risky. But a meaningless task is like trying to walk through sand. Every step feels heavier than the last. The deeper truth is that INFJs crave purpose with the same intensity others crave comfort. Their consistency depends on emotional alignment, not pressure, not rewards, not deadlines. When they reconnect with meaning, their focus snaps back into place, sharp and unshakable. But when meaning fades, so does their momentum. Understanding this doesn't just explain their inconsistency, it unlocks the key to their greatest strength, a life driven not by routine but by purpose. Their mind overanalyzes decisions, draining the momentum needed for steady action. This is the silent engine of INFJ inconsistency, a mind that doesn't simply think, but dissects, forecasts, replays, and anticipates every possible outcome before taking a single step. What looks like hesitation from the outside is actually a deep internal processing loop, one that burns enormous mental energy long before any action even begins. For an INFJ, every choice carries weight, meaning, and consequence. They are not wired to move impulsively. They consider how a decision aligns with their values, how it affects the future, how it impacts others, and what emotional costs might unfold down the line. By the time they are done analyzing, they are mentally exhausted before the task has even started. This tendency creates an invisible barrier between intention and execution. The INFJ knows what they want to do, and they may even feel passionate about it, yet their mind keeps opening new tabs. What if I choose wrong? What if I'm not ready? What if this leads nowhere? What if this changes everything? These questions aren't rooted in fear as much as they are rooted in responsibility. INFJs carry a heavy sense of significance around their decisions. They want to do things well, not halfway, with impact, not randomness. But this depth comes at a cost. Momentum collapses under the weight of perpetual analysis. And when momentum breaks, consistency shatters. An INFJ's energy thrives on clarity and emotional coherence. But overthinking muddies that internal clarity. The more angles they examine, the harder it becomes to choose a direction that feels unquestionably right. Their intuition may whisper the answer, but their analytical mind runs interference, drowning instinct beneath layers of possibility. This creates a mental tug-of-war that leaves them stuck in place, drained by the effort of thinking rather than doing. Yet, beneath this struggle lies a hidden strength. When INFJs finally decide, they commit with absolute conviction. Their choices, once made, are rarely impulsive or misguided. They have already walked the entire path in their mind. What they need is not pressure, but permission. Permission to move before every detail is perfect. Permission to act without knowing the entire story. Once they allow themselves that freedom, their momentum resets, their consistency returns, and their actions flow with the same depth and purpose as their thoughts. Emotional overstimulation shuts down their focus long before they realize it. For INFJs, focus isn't just a mental function, it's an emotional ecosystem. When the emotional atmosphere around them shifts, even slightly, their mind begins absorbing signals in the background. A coworker's irritation, a friend's unspoken sadness, a stranger's tension in the room, all of it enters their internal space without permission. This emotional intake happens so quickly and so quietly that the INFJ doesn't notice the weight accumulating until their focus suddenly collapses, as if someone pulled the plug on their mental power supply. They think they are just tired or unmotivated, but the truth is simpler. Their emotional bandwidth is flooded. The overstimulation doesn't come from drama or chaos alone. Sometimes it's subtle. Too many small interactions, too many unspoken expectations, too many environments that demand emotional awareness. INFJs unconsciously scan for tone, mood, motive, connection, and tension. They do this to navigate the world safely and gracefully, but the cost is enormous. Their mind splits its attention between the task at hand and the emotional data streaming in from every direction. The more emotional noise surrounds them, the harder it becomes to lock onto a single goal. What others call getting distracted is actually the INFJ being pulled into dozens of invisible emotional threads at once. What makes this especially difficult is that INFJs often blame themselves for the drop in focus. They think they're being lazy, inconsistent, or undisciplined, when in reality their nervous system has hit maximum capacity. Emotional overstimulation doesn't announce itself with alarms. It shows up as sudden exhaustion, mental fog, loss of motivation, irritability, or a quiet urge to withdraw from everyone. The INFJ interprets these sensations as personal failure, not understanding that their sensitivity is working overtime behind the scenes. By the time they realize what's happening, their focus has already collapsed. The task that once felt manageable now feels impossible. Even something simple becomes heavy. Their brain retreats instinctively, seeking silence, solitude, or a mental reset. Without that reset, they spiral into guilt. Why can't I keep up? Why do I lose energy so fast? Why can't I be consistent like everyone else? But the truth is this: the INFJ's emotional radar is both a gift and a burden. It allows them to navigate human complexity with extraordinary insight, but it also drains them faster than most people will ever understand. When they finally learn to recognize the early signs of overstimulation and step away before the shutdown, their focus doesn't just return, it becomes sharper, cleaner, and more aligned than ever. They take on too much responsibility, leaving little energy for their own goals. For INFJs, responsibility is not just an obligation, it is an instinct. The moment they sense that someone is struggling, overwhelmed, confused, or quietly asking for help without saying a word, something inside them activates. They step in naturally, almost automatically, offering emotional support, guidance, clarity, or structure, even when nobody explicitly asks them to. It feels easier to carry the weight themselves than to watch others stumble. But what begins as compassion slowly becomes a drain, siphoning away the very energy they need for their own dreams. INFJs rarely notice how much responsibility they've taken on until their own goals start slipping into the background. They become the emotional caretaker in groups, the problem solver in crises, the stable presence others rely on. Friends approach them because you always know what to say. Coworkers lean on them because you always figure things out, and partners depend on them because you understand everything. They wear these expectations like invisible armor, telling themselves that being dependable is simply part of who they are. but every moment spent holding someone else's world together steals time from building their own. The conflict comes quietly, their personal ambitions, writing the book, launching the project, improving their health, pursuing their passion, begin collecting dust. Not because they don't care, but because their emotional and mental bandwidth has been consumed by tending to the needs around them. An INFJ may go to bed exhausted, feeling as though they worked all day, yet notice that none of the work was for them. They pour so consistently into others that they forget what it feels like to pour into themselves. And because they're naturally empathetic, they carry a subtle guilt when they even think about redirecting that energy inward. Eventually, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. The INFJ starts feeling resentful, drained, or disconnected from their purpose. It's not burnout from doing too much, it's burnout from doing too much for everyone except themselves. Their goals feel out of reach, not because they lack talent or discipline, but because their emotional resources have been spread too thin across responsibilities they never meant to adopt. The tragedy is that people rarely see this internal depletion. INFJs are too good at appearing composed, steady, and strong. But the moment the INFJ finally recognizes this pattern, everything shifts. They begin to question why they are carrying burdens that don't belong to them. They start withdrawing from roles they never agreed to. They create boundaries that prioritize their dreams, not just their duties. And when they take their energy back, when they stop saving others at the cost of losing themselves, their consistency returns with a power that feels almost unstoppable. Their perfectionism creates internal pressure that makes starting or finishing tasks harder. INFJs don't pursue good enough. Their mind is wired toward depth, meaning, and precision, so when they begin anything, a project, a message, a decision, a creative idea, they immediately imagine the ideal version of it. Not the simple version, not the beginner version, the perfected version, the version that reflects everything they feel internally but have not yet translated into the real world. This vision becomes both their greatest strength and their quiet trap, because the moment the standard is set impossibly high, taking the first step begins to feel like walking into a storm with bare hands. They hesitate not out of laziness, but out of the fear that the final outcome will betray the brilliance they imagine in their mind. INFJs carry a unique form of pressure, the belief that anything they create must communicate their truth perfectly. They want their work to reflect every layer of meaning, every emotion, every insight they've gathered over years of observing life so deeply. And because perfection feels like the only acceptable destination, they often delay the start. They gather information, refine ideas, wait for the right moment, or tell themselves they need just a little more clarity. What looks like procrastination is actually paralysis born from wanting the outcome to honor their inner standards. And the guilt that comes with this paralysis only intensifies the pressure, making it harder to break the cycle. Even when they manage to begin, finishing becomes its own battle. INFJs revise endlessly, rewriting sentences, restructuring projects, reconsidering decisions, doubting timing, restarting plans. Their intuition keeps giving them new insights mid-process, and every new insight makes the old version feel inadequate. This internal loop creates a subtle exhaustion that erodes their consistency. They start feeling like they can never quite get it right, and instead of celebrating progress, they critique every detail that doesn't match their invisible blueprint. The project grows heavier, the expectations grow louder, and the momentum quietly dissolves. What makes this even harder is that INFJs hide this pressure well. On the outside, they look capable, creative, thoughtful, like people who should have no trouble finishing what they start. But inside, there's a constant battle between inspiration and self-criticism. They feel the weight of wanting to make something meaningful and the fear of falling short of their own vision. This internal tension drains their emotional energy long before the task is done, leaving them overwhelmed by something they once felt excited about. When INFJs finally break the perfectionism cycle, they transform. They learn that imperfect action builds momentum and that their first draft is not a verdict, it is a beginning. They discover that what they create doesn't need to be flawless to be powerful. And once they release the pressure to meet imaginary standards, they move with a freedom and consistency that was always waiting beneath the weight of perfection. When an INFJ finally understands why their consistency collapses, the fluctuating energy, the emotional overload, the perfectionism disguised as responsibility, something shifts. They stop seeing themselves as undisciplined and start recognizing the quiet battles they've been fighting alone. And once that awareness arrives, everything becomes clearer. Their patterns, their limits, their strengths, their needs. That clarity is the beginning of real change, the kind that doesn't demand force, but alignment. So here's the question for you. Which part of this hit you the hardest? The emotional energy, the overthinking, or the perfectionism trap? Comment the word alignment if you're ready to move differently starting today. And if you're new here or you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to Brainy One. There's more coming that will help you understand yourself on a deeper level than most people ever will. When INFJs finally break the perfectionism cycle, they transform. They learn that imperfect action builds momentum and that their first draft is not a verdict, it is a beginning. They discover that what they create doesn't need to be flawless to be powerful. And once they release the pressure to meet imaginary standards, they move with a freedom and consistency that was always waiting beneath the weight of perfection.